Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the Getting Good series. I wanted to kick things off by talking about a subject I actually don't hear a lot of talk about, and that's about mix-ups. And I think this is an area where when I watch good players play, they all incorporate all of these mix-ups into their game. And I know I missed out on a lot of these mix-ups for a very long time, and I only started picking up on them when I started paying more attention to the way that really good players play. And the types of mix-ups and number of mix-ups in the game is essentially unlimited. It's bound only by the move set and the variety of weapons you use. But I think that most mix-ups actually fit into just a few categories. And so I kind of want to run through those with you. So to me, at root, a mix-up is really nothing more than a sequence of attacks or movements that are designed not necessarily to deceive your opponent, but to give them something when they're expecting something else, and usually punish them for having the wrong reaction. So I think probably one of the mix-ups that people learn first, it's with a straight sword, R1, R1, R2. This is a great mix-up because somebody who's expecting you to just spam R1, they're going to roll after the end of the hit stun of the second R1, and they're likely to get caught by the R2. Now, I say it's a mix-up, but it's only a mix-up to the extent that it's, well, a mix-up. You can't do it over and over or it becomes predictable, and by definition, it is no longer a mix-up. And I'm sure we've all seen many straight sword users. They learn this mix-up and they overutilize it. It makes them really predictable. It opens them up to being parried. If the opponent has a hyper armor weapon, it opens them up to getting punished on the R2 because the player with the hyper armor weapon has time to get into hyper armor frames and can punish them for that R2. That said, if you don't use it very often, it's a fantastic mix-up and especially works really well if you've conditioned your opponent through the next mix-up. The next mix-up is actually R1 spam, and I know some players will say this is not a mix-up. They're wrong. It is absolutely a mix-up, provided you don't spam R1 all the time. If you don't usually spam R1, you can spam and get people caught up in a nasty combo that does huge amounts of damage. Do not sleep on R1 spam. It is a great tool in your arsenal, as long as you don't overuse it. You have to break it out very carefully and be choosy about when you use it, but it's a fantastic mix-up. Related to R1 spam, one of my other favorite mix-ups is 4 R1s followed by an R2. This works extremely well and actually tends to work best against good players who will look to reaction roll your attacks. So if you throw out 2 R1s, they're going to wait and try to reaction roll, or they may assume the R2's coming and they wait for it. You catch them out with the third R1, that naturally combos into the fourth R1. And what happens? Well, when people aren't prepared for what you're doing, when you do something unexpected, when you have a mix-up, that's when people tend to panic, even people who might not otherwise. And so after the fourth one, they panic roll, and then they get caught by the R2. So 4 R1s followed by an R2 is a really good mix-up, but really only works against good players or a player that just isn't expecting the R1 spam. Like some gankers get very accustomed to attacking out of hit stun because most invaders don't attack more than twice, either through habit or more often because there's too many opposing players around them and they can't afford to spend that much time in a series of attacks. Next up is one of my favorite mix-ups, and you don't see this one too often, although in fights against really good players, you'll see this more and more. And this is, you can call it staggered R1s, but they're not necessarily even staggered that much. The idea is the following, that when you hit a good player with an R1, they know you get a combo. So a lot of times they'll kind of sit and relax as a form of discipline. And I know I do this sometimes. I get hit by an R1 and I wait for the second R1 because I'm already thinking, what's the mix-up going to be? How do I escape after the second R1? And so a good player, knowing they're fighting a good player, will anticipate this reaction and they'll hit you with one R1, wait just a beat while you're standing there pondering what you're going to do after the second R1, and then they will start a new combo over. So instead of getting to hit you twice, they get to hit you at least 3 times. And they can continue this pattern. And often what you'll find is they'll do an R1, they'll stagger, they'll do another R1, and then you can start to throw in additional mix-ups. You can throw in an R2 if you think they're going to panic roll out of it, or you can take the second R1 in that combo, meaning a total of 3 R1s. And you can start to mix and match all of these mix-ups to great effect. And so far, the mix-ups I've described, they're mix-ups of aggression. So these are mix-ups you use when you're attacking somebody. But it's also important to remember to keep in mind mix-ups when you're escaping from another player. So you have to make sure that you mix up your escapes. And while I see people do a reasonably good job of mixing up their attacks, a lot of players do a very bad job of mixing up their escapes. In other words, they escape from combos the same way every time. So very junior players, rookie players, if you hit them with 2R1s on a straight sword, we all know what they're going to do. They're going to mash roll. They're going to try to get out of there as quickly as they can, which makes them very predictable and opens them up to punishments like R1, R1, R2, or maybe staggered attacks of some kind. But when you're fighting against a good player, it's really important that you mix up your escapes, because if they clue in on how you escape every time, they will adjust their approach to consistently punish it. So at the end of an attack sequence, say a true combo, 2R1s, you have a number of options. You can counterattack. You can try to wait to see what your opponent's going to do if they're going to reaction roll. You can wait to see what your opponent's going to do, and if they're going to attack, you can look to reaction roll. Or sometimes you may actually choose to panic roll, and I don't think panic rolling in these situations is always a bad idea. I think generally it's a bad idea, but I think when you're up against a player who's got a very fast weapon, it could be an S stock, it could be a curved sword, you may sometimes choose to preemptively roll. And I don't want to call it a panic roll because you're not panicking. It's a choice you make that you may wish to go ahead and roll in anticipation of an attack. And as long as you don't do it too often, you won't get in too much trouble over this. Attacking out of hit stun is always an interesting choice, and it's something that gets kind of beat out of many of us as we play the game because we get parried. But when you fight against good players, if people aren't using parry tools, or even if they are, on an occasion attacking out of stun, and I know this is something that used to burn me constantly as a player playing really top players. I would hit them with 2R1s and then wait for some sort of mix-up, and then they would just attack me before I had a chance to even get to my mix-up. And this is one of the reasons you see a lot of R1 spam in tournaments, and it is to foreclose that option to prevent the other player from counterattacking in those situations. So related to the concept of mix-ups, we also have the idea of opponent conditioning, and I first really learned about this from watching Mocha's videos, and he talks about it a fair bit, but I don't think he ever really goes into detail about what he's really thinking. And I expect that in the fighting game community, this is probably a better understood term, but I don't hear it being used very often in relation to Souls games. And I think conditioning to me really means doing the same thing repeatedly for a while to lead your opponent to always expect it. And a good example here could be mashing R1. And I know Mocha will often, when facing against a hyper armor opponent, an opponent with a hyper armor weapon, will just mash R1 against his opponent. Couple things can happen. If they try to attack out of stun, they're going to get punished and they're going to take more damage. If they just roll away after the second R1, then they've been conditioned to roll away after 2R1s, and now you can mix up off of that. The next time you can go for R1, R1, R2. But that's also why it's important as an opponent to mix up your escapes, because if you fight a player like Mocha, you might know that he's going to try to condition you and he's going to mash, and so you're going to roll after the second R1, and now you know he's expecting that, and so now you can play off of that. Now you might try attacking out of stun to punish the R1 spam that you're expecting. So this is kind of where some of the mind games start, but it's really important to think about not only how your opponent's conditioning you, but how you're conditioning your opponent. What are you teaching your opponent to expect? Because even if you don't intend to teach them anything, you teach them things every time you interact with them. Hey guys, I hope you guys enjoyed that content. Thanks for checking in. Take care now.